Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt inside the ReliefFactor.com studio. Good morning to you. I hope you have a good weekend ahead. I'm going to be spending mine reading a couple of books. Dana Perino has a new book out. Archbishop Charles Chaput has a new book out, Things Worth Dying For, Thoughts on a Life Worth Living. So I'm going to read both Dana and the Archbishop's book. And I encourage all of you to enjoy the weekend coming up. And don't look at your stock portfolio. That's the most important thing. Don't look at your stock portfolio. Because if there's one story today, okay, I'm going to tell you what the story is. Over at the Wall Street Journal, S&P on track for a third week of declines led by tech. There's been a treasury rout, meaning that the value of bonds is going down, 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 and the interest rates are going up, up, up. And the job gains are tepid. Now, what in the world's going on? We had such a good stock market for so long. What's happening? And we added about 210,000 jobs in February, according to economists. And the unemployment rate's at about 6.3, although the real number is going to be released at 8:30 today. But about 6.3%. It'll be somewhere in there. And we're looking around at stocks, and we're saying to ourselves, my goodness, Amazon went below $3,000. So I looked up. I haven't been below $3,000 in a year. And I began to read the Wall Street Journal, and it turns out, I don't pay much attention. I'm not an investor, nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn. I leave that to people who run mutual funds, and I don't check my balances. I don't do that because I'm not a buyer and seller of things. Only when the estimable Mr. Botkin calls me, do I do something? And he called me and said I was over-concentrated in that which I invest in one stock, Amazon. So I bought two other stocks, and now he leaves me alone again. And mutual funds. But that's what the estimable Mr. Botkin told me to do. But in the meantime, I looked up last night and see that 3 weeks in a row, the S&P's been getting shattered. So all the mutual funds that I own are down. All the stocks that I own are down. Value of my 401k and IRA is down, 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 down. And luckily, I don't have an adjustable rate mortgage. I see interest rates are up, up, up. How up, up, up? Now, this is not an ad for AndrewandTodd.com. This is not an ad. But boy, oh boy, if you're buying a house, you better hurry up. If you're buying a house, you had better call Andrew and Todd today. 888-888-1172 or go visit their website, AndrewandTodd.com. That's not an ad because they didn't pay for it. They're a great sponsor of the show, don't get me wrong. But on Fridays, they don't put an ad out. Why? Well, because they like their Saturdays and Sundays off. But now they've got a new young slave pulling a galley over there, so they can just make the slave stay there in the office all weekend and answer the phone. 888-888-1172. His name is Harley, and he has to be there now 72 hours straight without no sleep because I'm telling this on Friday. Just call him this weekend. Because this is wild. The 10-year Treasury yesterday got up to 1.55%. Now, it got to 0.52 9 months ago. It was down to 0.52. Now, the 10-year Treasury is usually around 2.5% in the last 5 to 7 years. And then the virus hit, and it plummeted because no one was, you couldn't get a loan, and the loans weren't available. And when they came back, they were very low, and people thought the economy was crushed. And, of course, Donald Trump bought it back, and the three packages that were targeted brought it back. But the Senate is debating today a $1.9 trillion slush fund. It's a giant hose down of the country with money that looks like it's going to go to everybody who's got a D behind their name. It's not an economically sound package. And though they threw out the subway in Silicon Valley and they've tossed out a couple of high-end pork things, the Fed employees out there are still going to get $21,000 each for staying home if their child has to stay home from school. Schools are still closed. The vaccine numbers are great. I'll check them. I'll give you the latest from the CDC. We now have 110 million doses delivered and 82 million doses administered in the United States. And I'll be the first to tell you, I've had one dose, waiting for the second dose. And I feel a lot better. I go to my work anyway, but my work's in a studio, so I'm not having to work with people. I'm not worried. I'll bet you that Solaire, our buddy Brett Rasmussen at Solaire Infrared Grills, besthotgrills.com, besthotgrills.com. I'll bet you they are pumping out grills and patio heaters as fast as they can. I will bet you that our friends at relieffactor.com are zipping around and people are working hard who have jobs. I know that, but the interest rate is going to eventually slow this economy down. And when I say the interest rate, I mean the 10-year Treasury at 1.55%. And so why has it gone up? So that now you're not going to get an interest rate in the 2s anymore. You're going to get an interest rate in the 3s. But next year, you're going to be begging for an interest rate in the 4s. So you better get off your fanny and call Andrew and Todd at 888-888-1172 today and get a pre-qualifying letter. If you're going to go out there, you're going to go look for a house in April. No, go look for a house this weekend. Put on a mask. Go out there and go to open houses, do virtual open houses. The number of people who are leaving cities, I hope you're not trying to buy a condo in New York City. That's like catching a falling knife. Condo prices in New York City are just a nightmare. If you're in D.C., they're going up through the roof. John Leahy, our friend, call up John this weekend. Lahey. If you're in Atlanta, go find Gina Cousineau. If you're in, well, no matter where you are, go find a realtor this weekend because Cousineau, who? Tracy Cousineau, I'm sorry. And don't wait around. Atlanta, go call Tracy Cousineau, D.C., the Tri-Metro area, Maryland, D.C. Go find John Leahy. Go find a realtor who knows what they're doing. Call up Andrew and Todd, 888-888-1172, because I look at the economics of this and I say, this is not good. Joe Biden's going to kill the economy faster than I thought. I thought he'd kill the economy by, cutting jobs like the XL pipeline. Oil is up at $65 a barrel. Under Trump, it was around $40 a barrel for the last year, even with the shutdown. And the markets are down 3 weeks in a row. Now, maybe it's early in the day. I don't know if they'll turn that around during the day. I never know what the Friday numbers are going to be like on Friday before 4 p.m. But I know that Germany's down 0.77%. Hong Kong went down. Japan went down. England's up. England's actually 0.13% up. But when yesterday's 10-year bond was at 1.47% and this morning's at 1.55%, that means everything is getting more expensive. And the reason is because the Democrats are going to print $2 trillion. And they're going to spend it on public employee unions. And by the way, this is not stimulus money. When you bail out the states and the states tuck that money away to pay their current and past employees for the next 35 years, ridiculous high pensions. And I do mean ridiculously high pensions. And right now, I don't mean to make you feel bad. There's a water district worker going to work in California somewhere, and they've worked hard for 25 years. They've been going in and checking those valves or moving paper around and checking bills and answering customer service. They've been really in it. They've been in the thick of battle for 25 years at that desk. And they're going to retire, they're going to retire after 25 years at $120,000 a year. And they're going to be 55. And they're going to count on working, living into 100 for another 45 years. And the state of California will send them that $120,000 for 45 more years. That's how it works. Every teacher in California puts in their 30 years. They're going to get their high three. High three being whatever their highest salary was at the end of 3 years. I'm not going to ask Sticky Fingers Patterson, that's the wife of Dwayne, what her salary is, but she'll make that salary for the rest of her life, and she deserves it because she taught 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. So she actually is sort of like a colonel in the military.
She should get combat. She should get combat pay.
Combat pay. All that money that they're going to spend today in the Senate or tomorrow is going to go to government workers who are Democratic states, blue state bonanza. But it's screwing your portfolio and it's crushing the market. And it's Joe Biden's his 100 days will be remembered for crushing the stock market and destroying your hopes of buying a home. 1-800-520-1234. What do you think?
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, and the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
He's Andrew Cuomo. He's like a mafia don. He doesn't go out of anywhere unless it's in a box. Tell us, what's the truth, Joe Piscopo?
You know, Seb, he is. He's the Terminator of politics. And he really is. He'll be back. I'll be back. You know, and then I love everybody's making the mafia references because he's Italian. I don't get offended by it, but he's like the Salazzo character. Remember?
Yes, Virgil Salazzo.
I don't like violence, Michael. It's bad for business, you know? I mean, and then or how about this line? You want to see Governor Cuomo say that the bad news for me and bad news for you. You know, it's like a character. However, let me put this caveat out there, if I may, my friend. When I knew Andrew 30 years ago, 20 years ago, he was always nice. He was always cordial. He was always a gentleman. That's the Andrew Cuomo I know. I don't know who this guy is now, you know? And I'm
really?
Michael Goodwin. Yeah, honestly. And
so you say he's changed?
I don't look. I talked to Kieran Lawler, who's up in Albany, one of the assemblymen, and Kieran said, "Joe, why are you saying nice things about Andrew Cuomo?" I said, "I'm just saying when I met him, he was nice." Then I talked to Michael Goodwin this morning, that we know and love from the New York Post, and Michael says he has changed in office. I do know this about him. First of all, he was always nice to me, and I always open the mic up to join me on the air. But I'm not Seb Gorka. I like to think I'm a good radio guy, but I'm not. He said to me, he goes, "Joe, I love you, but you know Dr. Gorka." He told me that. No, not really, but the thing is, what he did was with the women was one thing, and he apologized, and we have to accept that. I think easy for me to say, but it was nice that he did that. Not, you know what this means? The Italians go like this, you and the Italians go like this. They not one question from any reporter about the nursing home debt.
Right.
Did you notice that?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Speaking of study.
Welcome back, America. In California, I'm just talking about California, one state, there are 340,000 government employees who make six-figure salary or who take home six-figure pension checks. Okay, that's why the blue state bailout is needed. You, in the red states, are going to pay billions of dollars to bail out the blue states who are profligate. 340,000 people on government payroll are making six-figure income, and some of them are making significantly higher. They have $1 trillion in unfunded state liabilities in California. They promised people pensions they haven't got to the tune of $1 trillion. So the blue state bailout is exactly why it's not moving the market. You would think if we were doing a fiscal stimulus, stocks would be soaring. And stocks have gone down, as the Wall Street Journal said, for 3 straight weeks. I want to remind you a couple of things. AskAhost.com. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. in the East, 5 in the West. I'm sitting down to talk with a small group of listeners. Go to AskAhost.com and register. It costs, I don't know, what's it cost, $175? And we're just going to have a merry old time talking about the stuff that I can't talk about on the air in a manner I can't talk about on the air. You can ask me anything. You can ask me about Dwayne. I'll tell you about Dwayne. Oh, well, I tell you about Dwayne. And he won't be there to interrupt me and cut me off like he normally does. I'll tell you about Adam and Ben and Harley. Frick and Frack over there, Tweedledee and Tweedledum at the phones. 1-800-520-1234. You don't want to miss it. Now, I've been talking about the market, so let's go check gold. The other thing about this is that I tell you every day to buy a little bit of gold. You should have 10% of your assets in gold and between 10 and 25 in fixed value, gold or real estate. And gold is down to $1,691. Again, a counter-inflationary signal that makes no sense in this market. This market is so screwed up by the Biden plan. They can't make a sense out of this. Gold is going down and the interest rates are going up. 10-year Treasury at 1.55. But it's good for you. If you haven't bought gold recently, now's a good time to add some more to the portfolio or the stockpile, or to move a portion of your IRA or 401k over to Birch Gold. All you have to do is call them, and the ability to do that is at hughgold.com. They'll give you a number, or text my name, Hugh, to 474747, and Birch Gold will tell you how to invest in gold and precious metals and to do it the real way. You actually own the physical gold or silver. You will not own paper in a spider or something like that. It's the real deal. Gold at $16.91. You ought to be burning the phones up to Birch Gold. HughGold.com. Don't wait another day. Alan in Tampa. Hi, Alan. Good Friday to you.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, Hugh, my comment is I hope the economy gets hurt for the next 2 years so Americans understand who they put in office. And I also hope the Republicans change their narrative and start speaking to regular people in regular terms so they understand exactly what's going on. I think there's a huge problem with communication from the Republican Party to the base of Americans. Not just the Trump people who love Trump, they're going to vote Republican, but I'm talking about the fringe people, the people who are going to work every day, who don't really pay attention to the economy, who are living paycheck to paycheck, and don't understand that the Democrats are not their friends. And
have I been doing that this morning, Alan? Do you think I've done that this morning?
Yes, I do, but I think you have a very, very small subsegment of the population that listens. I mean, you have to understand, maybe 10% of the people that are going to work every day listen to your show.
No, I got about 6 million people. It's less than that. I got 6 million people listening. Now that's growing. I've been picking up affiliates in the aftermath of the tragic loss of Rush. A lot of stations are deciding to put me on in the Rush slot. I can't replace Rush, but it's a different kind of show. This is news and facts driven. And I take guests. I got former Secretary of State Pompeo today. I have a lot of guests on. But today, I wanted people to understand this big bill moving through the Congress is not their friend. They might get a check for $1,400, but the economy's going to fall down around their heads. And they expect you to be bought off with that if you're middle class or lower. And meanwhile, the jobs are going away. And inflation's going to eat that up. A lot of you people are going to put that in the bank, and you should, because the inflationary impact is huge. Stay tuned, America.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Speaking of studies, one of them was led by the black Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, who made the argument that unskilled illegal aliens pose competition to unskilled black and brown workers. And Coretta Scott King once wrote a letter, I believe it was you who brought my attention to that. I wrote a letter to Congress urging them not to relax sanctions against employers who knowingly hire illegal aliens because of the threat that they pose to black and brown workers. That was Coretta Scott King writing that letter.
And there are a number of others, Barbara Jordan and others, of course. But this was at a time when many of our black leaders actually had true adult, sane concerns about the prospects of African Americans. These days, I don't want to cast any aspersions on anyone, but if you take a look at our so-called black leaders, they're all in uniform lockstep with the principal interests of the Democratic Party, as opposed to the average American and average black American. We have had hearing after hearing at the Civil Rights Commission. There have been numerous hearings before Congress on this. The evidence is plain. Yes, you're going to get contrary arguments from people. I would urge your listeners, take a look at the data. One of the pieces of evidence before the Civil Rights Commission is that 40% of the a full 18-point decline in labor rates among blacks prior to the Trump administration came from competition from illegal immigrants. That's astonishing. That was turned around under Trump. We actually had a complete reversal. We had the lowest unemployment rates among blacks in history, and especially among young blacks. And labor participation rates for young blacks was going through the roof. And now, just because Trump implemented this, we're reversing this, and we're damaging the prospects in a time when we can't afford it in the midst of a pandemic.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another $1 trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, and the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.com. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
As the Wall Street Journal editorial board points out, the Biden-Harris administration has changed to full-throated encouragement, though not before continuing to trash the Trump efforts. The White House is saying, you just heard Biden. Oh, the previous administration didn't contract for enough vaccine. We fixed all that. That's a lie. As the Wall Street Journal points out, the supply was ramping up very quickly. The real problem was the last mile of distribution controlled by the states. Governors like Cuomo tried to satisfy political constituencies that wanted early access to vaccines, adding complexity and bureaucracy that confused the public. Biden made the same mistake, asking states to give priority to educators, read teachers' unions, school staffers, and child care workers. That's arbitrary and unfair. A 30-year-old teacher who may still work remotely until September is at far less risk than a 50-year-old FedEx driver who interacts with customers all day. As the Wall Street Journal points out, the fairest, least political distribution standard is age. The Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed also contracted most of the vaccine supply for production before approval by the FDA. 200 million doses each of Pfizer and Moderna, and 100 million of Johnson & Johnson.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
Andrew Cuomo was
Welcome back, America, live from Chateau Marmont. Sonny Bunch, that's where he hangs out. He's in the lobby. It's a little bit early in California. He goes downstairs, spends his day by the pool, talking with the glitterati of L.A. Good morning, Sonny Bunch. How are you?
I'm great. Hugh, how are you?
I'm terrific. You got to give me something to do this weekend. I'm going crazy. I can't watch another Grant Chester, another Shetland Island, another Endeavor, British murder mysteries, most dangerous island in the world. I'm tired of the British killing each other. I've got to watch something.
Well, we've got something American for you. We got an American option here.
Tell us about it.
Do you remember the Eddie Murphy movie Coming to America?
Well, yeah, I was like 10. I'm 65, so that was 45 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, that was late 80s. It was 88, 87. So it's been 30-some years, right?
So is Eddie Murphy alive? Is Eddie Murphy still alive?
Coming to America, starring Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall, about the Prince Hakeem of the African nation of Zamunda, comes to Queens to find a bride. He doesn't want to have the arranged marriage that was set up for him. He wants to find his own lovely lady, and it's a kind of funny fish out of water movie, right? Which is it's a fish out of water, and the audience is also a fish out of water because most of us are not familiar with Queens and the various kind of ridiculous sorts of people. Well, there's a sequel to that movie. There's a sequel to that movie. There's a movie called Coming to the Number 2 America, starring Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall as the older versions of the characters they were playing.
Now, Sonny, I liked the first one 100 years ago. I did. I thought it was charming. Yeah. Did you like the first one?
Well, I did. I mean, it's fun. It's funny. It's funny. And I watched it again because it's on Amazon Prime. It's on Amazon Prime right now. And I watched it as a primer, so to speak, for the sequel. And the kind of interesting thing about Coming to America, number 2, I don't really know how to describe this verbally. You have to see it. You have to see the the number 2, to understand which version I'm talking about. But Coming to America 2 is debuting on Amazon Prime today. It's on Amazon Prime right now. If you once you're done listening to this interview, you can hop right on your computer and watch it.
No, in 2.5 hours you can do that. Sonny, don't drive listeners away from the radio. In 2.5 hours they can go watch America Coming number 2 to America.
As soon as you're done listening to Hugh, of course, you don't want to skip the rest of this wonderful show. The movie, the sequel is on coming. The sequel is coming to Amazon Prime. It's on Amazon Prime right now. You can watch it in the comfort of your own home. It's one of these deals. Paramount was going to release this in theaters, and instead of doing that, they sold it to Amazon Prime for some ungodly sum of money. And Amazon Prime is debuting it this weekend in the hopes of getting people to sign up for their video service. Everybody already has. Amazon Prime is such a weird value proposition for Amazon. I don't quite understand it because very few people who actually have Amazon Prime, and almost everyone in the country has Amazon Prime now.
You're wrong about that. Every single person matters to Jeff Bezos, and everybody is marginal profit. It's all 100% profit now. It's all built out, so every single subscriber they get to Amazon Prime is a lifetime member. So they will do anything to get that marginal viewer. So
right, except I'm very curious to know how many people sign up for Amazon Prime for the video service, because again, it's not clear to me how many people actually use Amazon Video as opposed to like people who, like me, get Amazon Prime for the packages, and Amazon Prime Video is just kind of a nice little bonus add-on.
In 2019, there were 112 million Amazon Prime subscribers. And so that's probably up to 130 million now out of 330 million Americans, but that's a number of individuals, not households. They still have another 50% growth left. So, anything to bring somebody in, whether it's half off on a screwdriver or Coming to America, although it's got to be a good movie, or at least maybe they're appealing to the urban ethnic Black American subscriber here. Is it any good, Sonny?
Well, what it is it's a total rehash of the first. If you like the first, you will see lots of things in this movie that remind you of the first one. I mean, it's not even that they're telling the same jokes exactly, if that they just have all of the same characters show up again. I mean, like down to strange bit characters. Like in the first, there was a montage of women that Prince Hakeem meets at a bar when he is trying to find a new bride. And one of those characters was a set of twins who were beatboxing rappers, and they show up in this movie. I mean, it's that sort of granular level of reference. So,
how interesting!
If you want to watch this movie, I recommend rewatching the original to really make sure that you're able to understand all of the references in this.
So
movie.
it's a 38.
It's not terrible. It's
a
not terrible.
38-year trip through the memory hole.
Very much through the. I don't know if memory hole is the right word. We don't want to bring up Big Brother here, but it's a 38-year nostalgia trip. It's a very much a movie that is just, it exists to please the centers of your brain that remind you of other older, better things. This is not as good as the original. It's not as funny.
CJ, Sonny, yesterday I had CJ Box on, and he's written 21 novels about Joe Pickett, and they're all very good. Have you read them by chance?
No.
Okay, well, in every one of these novels he has to tell a new story, but he also has to hit the mystic chords of memory from every other Joe Pickett novel. So he's got to reference every other Joe Pickett novel to move forward. And this is also true about any thriller series. And so what you're talking about is a new story about the king, but it's one that plucks the mystic chords of memory by putting everybody back in there. So everybody should refresh their memory first before watching it, or they'll miss the art of the movie, right? Which is the conceit of the movie.
Yeah. I mean, I strongly recommend. Again, it's on Amazon. You can watch it for free. If you have Amazon Prime, you can watch it right now. It's on there, and it's a funnier, better movie. It was directed by John Landis. It's R-rated, so it's a little harder edged. It's got a little rougher language, a little extra nudity. This is a PG-13 comedy, so it's a little more neutered. It's a little, they're not going to go for quite the same level of raunch or shock. It has its nice moments. Wesley Snipes plays a deranged African dictator in this, and Wesley Snipes has kind of carved himself a role as comic relief in new Eddie Murphy movies. He was also in Dolomite Is My Name as a kind of deranged director who was kind of flouncy and effeminate. In this movie, he's exaggeratedly masculine. It's kind of amusing.
Sonny, I saw the ad for this because every one of those British murder mysteries that I just told you about, Shetland, Endeavour, Grantchester, they're all on Amazon Prime. And they're pushing this pretty hard when you tune on Amazon Prime. And I've turned to the Fetching Miss Hewitt and I said, not for $1 million will I watch that movie. And my sales resistance is high because I assume it's just COVID fodder. And COVID fodder is anything that's been made because I assume people are sitting around with nothing to do. You're telling me it's not COVID fodder?
Well, it's not COVID fodder because it was made before COVID, and Paramount had planned on releasing this in theaters. We're riding a wave of Eddie Murphy nostalgia in recent memory, so they thought this was going to be a big hit. And it's a big, kind of expensive looking movie. I mean, it's not a cheap film, but it's also just not as good as the original. I mean, if you had to pick one, I would strongly recommend just rewatching the original.
All right. But, I have to switch. I got to make sure I plug your podcast because you haven't. People now know about that, but I want to talk about Across the Aisle. Did I get it right?
Across the Movie Aisle.
Across the Movie Aisle. Washington. Who's in that? Who's on Across the Movie Aisle with you?
It's Alyssa Rosenberg of the Washington Post and Peter Sugarman of Reason Magazine.
All right. Now, where do people find Across the Movie Aisle?
You can find it at Bulwark plus.thebulwark.com, or we're also on Apple. If you just search
Spotify and everything else.
Yep.
When do you tape that?
We tape that Monday afternoon, and it goes up Tuesday morning. We talk about something that came out the weekend before, generally speaking.
I think that podcasts are the new movies. I think they're actually, I'm watching it. I'm amazed by the number of people who are watching the interview with Hugh Hewitt. I'm just amazed. People are into podcast. What do you make of this, Sonny? Is it because there's no movie?
It's interesting. I mean, the podcast numbers are actually down during the pandemic because the primary places where people were listening to podcasts were the gym, right? You go to the gym, you listen while you're working out, or on their commutes. And, people obviously do not have the same sort of commutes anymore. So, there's a lot of, there are fewer opportunities for kind of captive listening audiences.
But there are far more podcasts. But there are far more podcasts. There are far more podcasts now than there were before. Everybody's stuck at home. We're all just kind of doing our podcast thing. The thing that strikes me the most about podcasts is not necessarily the number of listeners, but the connection listeners feel with the podcast hosts. I know people who listen to my various shows who will mention episodes I did, a year ago or 2 years ago on one of my shows, the Sub Beacon, and it's kind of crazy. It's like they listen to it over and over again. No, I'm discovering this with the interview. I've been podcasting my radio show for years, but now I'm doing the interview with Hugh Hewitt, long form interviews, and people just like it, and I think it's because there's nothing to do, and they're finding new things. By the way, Sonny, that's why Across the Movie Aisle, it's a new podcast, so every listener, you're vulturing, as I'm vulturing off of an existing audience that's declining. It's really kind of disintermediation of the old podcast.
And I think that, there's another show I do called The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood, which is a long-form interview show, and people really like that as well. And I think part of part of that format in particular is interesting and popular because it's kind of dead. Like, you don't have a lot of there's no Dick Cavett show anymore, right? There's no
other than the Hugh Hewitt show, Sonny. Other than the Hugh Hewitt show.
Oh, sure. But I mean, there's no one-on-one long-form interview shows, or very few. Margaret Hoover has her show that is what was it, the Buckley show, the Firing Line, right? There are some people out there who are trying to do this. But I think it's a good format for podcasts. You sit down, you have a one-on-one. It's like you're in a room watching two people talk, except it's just in your ears. And people are very into that.
They are, and their numbers are growing. And Sonny, we'll start one someday so that I can actually let you finish the sentence. But we never have enough time. Sonny Bunch, Across the Movie Aisle. Go get his podcast. Thank you, Sonny. Don't forget ReliefFactor.com. I've got less than 20 seconds to actually open this. Can I get this done? There's Relief Factor. This is actually sort of like one of the old game show challenges. In fact, I go done live. ReliefFactor.com. That's how easy it is to take it every single day. Don't leave home without it, especially on a Friday, because you're a weekend warrior on the weekend. ReliefFactor.com. I Karen Kirkman is Veritrol Omega. Take yours today. Come right back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Andrew Cuomo was rewarded every single step of the way by mass media, by Hollywood, for his handling of the Chinese coronavirus. And here's a question that we brought up earlier. I don't know if we actually ordered his book or not. How did he get away with writing a book in the midst of a scandal? In the midst of a crisis? Could you imagine if Donald Trump published a book in the midst of the Chinese coronavirus? Andrew Cuomo, Cut 51, says, who cares people died in nursing homes or hospitals? The Hillary Clinton way of looking at it. What difference does it make? Play tape.
But we're below the national average in number of deaths in nursing homes. But who cares? 33, 28, died in a hospital, died in a nursing home. They died.
So why does that matter? That's actually a really important point. Since we do not have any form of an honest press in our country, a follow-up question would say, well, Mr. Cuomo, let me tell you why that matters. Because in densely populated nursing homes of people over the age of 80 with comorbidities, if you were putting infected patients into those environments, it matters a lot. Whereas in hospitals, they're far more equipped to handle people that are currently fighting upper respiratory illnesses or diseases than a nursing home. Wouldn't you agree with that, Mr. Cuomo?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, and the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Joined now by the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Tarzana Joe. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. You know, with rare exception, poets only make the news when they do something bad or something bad happens to them. In either case, we should take note. When you grow up, oh, you can be a mariner who sails the sea, or you could be, if hard you try, a pilot who gets planes to fly, a spelunker who goes in caves, a barber who gives people shaves, a coroner who drives a hearse, a bureaucrat who makes things worse. Yes, you can race a racing car no matter what your pronouns are. But oh, the fortunes you can earn when you decide which books to burn. Yes, that's the job you must aspire to, picking things we should set fire to, which wrong opinions we should drown, what statues need our tearing down, what ways of living we should rout, which people we should cancel out, what persons we allow to teach, and who can give a Berkeley speech. So show your cultural defiance. Don't study math. Don't study science. Philosophers aren't very wise. Don't bother with those old Greek guys. Pick the path with all the fun. Enroll in Wokeness 101. And spend each working hour pensive, judging what you find offensive. Then put a giant red line through it. It's easy once you warm up to it. Oh, see the negative reaction? You won't believe the satisfaction. Now, for myself, I had light use for stories penned by Dr. Seuss. His were the books I never relished. I thought his rhymes too unembellished. But even with things as they are, I think these folks have gone too far. And if this time we don't resist, who knows who's next up on their list? That's First They Came for the Poets by Tarzana Joe.
You were really ham and egging it there.
Oh, thank you so much.
Green ham and egging it, Tarzana Joe. Tarzana Joe, your defense of Dr. Seuss's Admiral. I want to know if you've got a St. Patrick's Day commission yet.
Those in your heritage, I think they have their own poems. I don't think they want to hire an Italian poem from Tarzana Keller.
I'm astonished by this. I think there should be a St. Patrick's Day poem demand. So, look, if you're still out there, you've got a couple of weeks. Write to Joe at TarzanaJoe@Reagan.com, TarzanaJoe@Reagan.com. How is the poetry business generally, Joe?
Very good, very well. I see the pickup in poetry orders coming in with the V-shaped recovery.
And the approach of wedding season, a real wedding season. Joe, as always, a pleasure. That'll be posted at TarzanaJoe.com.
It will be. Thank you.
First they came for the poets, TarzanaJoe.com. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
I want everyone to remember Food for the Poor. It's the first week that I've been doing that this month, and we've already raised $18,000, something crazy, and that's great because we got to raise $200,000. Last time I did this, we raised $250,000, and since then it's collapsed. They feed people who are in peril, food peril, all year round, and they do so especially in times of crisis. And COVID has crushed Honduras. It's crushed the tourism economy. It's crushed the food supply economy. It's crushed the relief economy. And so we have a click to donate Food for the Poor banner at the top of HughHewitt.com, and it says give food, but the banner says click to donate. And I had them change the banner yesterday because some of you were not connecting the banner that was up there on top, so they added a second banner, click to donate. Look, 6 months you can feed a boy or girl for $37. That's all it takes. And Food for the Poor, it's not French cuisine. It's rice and beans, but it works. On Loma, we put the question why people ought to make donations to poor in Honduras when it might be a stretched time at home. Angel said this.
The answer is pretty straightforward. You see, in the United States, we have 1.8 million nonprofit organizations, and of these, less than 24,000 are actually international. So we have directed our attention to countries where the government is not as wealthy and where they're not anywhere near the number of organizations that are able to help the poor.
That is a pretty simple answer. There is no not-for-profit sector in Honduras. There's Food for the Poor. So if you want to help out Central America and the Caribbean, if you just want to do mission work, and a lot of people's churches, they're crippled in their mission work this year. I hope they're still up and running. Do it yourself with $100, with $50. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I made the largest donation we've ever made to Food for the Poor because like every other group in the COVID year, it's tougher to raise money. It's tougher to put the appeal out there, but the need has exploded. It's vast, it's enormous, and people are starving to death. Some people are fleeing north to the border. Some people are just dying in place. But Food for the Poor is there with rice and beans because of you. So would you, before you do anything this weekend, give up an In-N-Out burger, give up a trip to Trader Joe's, give up something. Instead, send that $5 or $15 or $25 to Food for the Poor. The banner's at the top of HughHewitt.com, or you can call 855-359-4673. 855-359-4673, but it's early in most places of the country, so I would encourage you to head over to HughHewitt.com and give it there. I encourage you to come back because former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo joins me. Also going to talk with presidential historian Tevi Troy on the way that Team Biden is lifting off very, very slowly. They're killing the stock market. They're also losing every record ever made for slowest starting appointees because of that stupid impeachment, and more in the next hour of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another $1 trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, and the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Well, my question is, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about systemic racism, and I mentioned one of your nuggets that actually more white people, unarmed white people, are killed than black people. And you say, of course they are, because there's more white people in this country than black people. So what's the answer to that? I didn't know how to come back on that.
Real simple. White people are what percentage of the population? Around 61%. What percentage of the homicides are committed by white people? 50%, meaning they commit, as a percentage of their population, less murders than blacks do at 13%. We commit almost half of the homicides at 13%. So at 13%, we're far, far more likely to be an offender and a victim of a homicide. A young black man is anywhere from 7 to 10 times more likely, Larry, to be the victim of a homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black man. The leading cause of death for young white men, Larry, is accidents, like car accidents or pool drownings. The leading cause of death, preventable or non-preventable for young black men, homicide, almost always at the hands of another black man. That is why the police are there. It is true that the police are 2.5 times more likely to kill a black suspect. It's also true, as I said, that a young black suspect is 7 or 8 times more likely to be a victim of a homicide. That's why the cops are there. You look at a city, Larry, like St. Louis. St. Louis is about 45% black. About 300 homicides last year, 90% of them black on black. Baltimore, 65% black. About 400 homicides last year, 90% of them black on black. Chicago, a third black, a third white, a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides black on black. Tell your friend that.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
Biden announcing yesterday, here's what he said about enough vaccines for every adult in America in a matter of weeks.
We're now on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult in America by the end of May. Let me say that again. When we came into office, the prior administration had contracted for not nearly enough vaccine to cover adults in America. We rectified that. About 3 weeks ago, we were able to say that we'll have enough vaccine supply for adults by the end of July. And I'm pleased to announce today, as a consequence of the stepped-up process that I've ordered and just outlined, this country will have enough vaccine supply, I'll say it again, for every adult in America by the end of May.
Now, while that's good news, he can't help himself in taking pot shots at the previous administration that has delivered the vaccines to the world. They laughed. They mocked Trump when he set a target date of having a vaccine at the end of 2020. Well, guess what? We got the vaccine by the end of 2020. You know why? Because of President Trump's Operation Warp Speed. Remember Kamala Harris, who said she might not even take the vaccine that was recommended by the Trump administration? Well, now they've done a 180-degree pivot. Now, as the Wall Street Journal editorial board points out, the Biden-Harris administration has changed to full-throated encouragement.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another $1 trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, And the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine. Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
You see, the story of the nursing homes is actually a very complicated story. The nursing home story is one that we warned about on this program, and the great one Mark Levin warned about back in March. I remember listening to the Mark Levin radio program, and a woman called into the Great One's radio show and said, Mark, I work for a nursing home association, and Andrew Cuomo is now ordering Chinese coronavirus infected patients to be put into nursing homes. And at the time Andrew Cuomo was doing his multi-hour, slow, daily briefings. Mark Levin asked the caller, this can't possibly be true, and Janice Dean, who works for Fox News, claims that both of her parents were killed as a result of this policy. Let's also get the tape of Janice Dean. So this was a scandal that we knew was occurring. Now, putting Chinese coronavirus infected patients into nursing homes is bad enough. But Andrew Cuomo decided to do something worse than that. He doubled down on the policy, lied about it ever happening, and then covered it up. You see, early on in the virus, it's understandable that mistakes are going to be made. Some Republican governors made some mistakes. And you course correct. You say, we shouldn't have done that. And you adjust. That's what being a leader is all about. So do I think that Andrew Cuomo was a fool to sign off on this policy? Absolutely.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi. Breaking news this morning. Cuomo team altered report on COVID nursing home deaths. It's over at WSJ.com. There was a significant undercount, and it has been acknowledged. The New York governor's top advisors successfully pushed state health officials to strip a public report of data showing that more nursing home residents had died of COVID-19 than the administration acknowledged. The July report had been simply a cover-up. I don't think Cuomo survives. We'll ask our guest, Tevi Troy, presidential historian, longtime friend of the show. Good morning, Tevi. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. Thanks for having me on. And when you said breaking news, Cuomo lied about the numbers. I didn't know that was breaking news. We've heard it multiple times now.
we now know that they actually changed documents. Tevi, does he survive this? You're a keen observer from a historian's perspective of this. And now we have, the 3 strikes and you're out rule on harassing women. And now we've got a cover-up. Cuomo's got to go, doesn't he?
Well, I think he has to go, but I don't think he's going to leave. He's quite obstinate in his statements, and he said, "I apologize, but I'm not going anywhere." The voters in New York, and I think we've seen this with Democrats recently. Look at Ralph Northam. You thought that there was no chance he could survive, but he said, "I'm not leaving," and there's very little force to push him out. So I think
what's interesting?
His presidential ambitions are dead.
Yeah, but also interesting. They redistrict in New York this year. And so all those Democrats who have to redistrict have to also think, oh, my gosh, the Cuomo stench is going to pervade the 2022 cycle, and that's going to kill us. When you lose early in an administration like we're about to talk about with Joe Biden, that's forgotten by the time November 2022 rolls around. But if Andrew Cuomo is still there leering at you, with all the dead marched lined up behind him in the ads, that's going to kill the Democrats in New York State.
It's true, but he cares more about himself than necessarily about the Democrats in the state. So I'm not sure he leaves so fast.
All right, let's go to the key thing. You have written about whether or not Neera Tanden's defeat and other slow approvals are unique. What's the story, Tevi?
Well, as you know, I'm a presidential historian, so whenever one of these things happens, I look to precedent. And there have been instances of presidents losing nominees early in an administration, and you kind of forget about it. It's a one-week story. But then these things have huge implications. So I started with John Tower, who everybody assumed was going to be confirmed. He was a senator from Texas, longstanding Republican, expert in defense, and he gets dinged as Secretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush because of stories about him carousing and womanizing and drinking. And they were true stories, but people didn't think that that was the kind of thing that would kill you in a nomination process. And it has two implications. One is your personal life becomes part of the nomination process in a way that it hadn't. But also, this elevates Dick Cheney, who had no interest in leaving the House. He was looking to be Speaker one day. And Dick Cheney becomes Secretary of Defense, helps prosecute the first Gulf War very successfully, and then obviously becomes a very powerful vice president under George W. Bush.
And what's interesting about that, there also became a Tower test, which is you cannot be a fall-down drunk. That is actually the Tower test put succinctly, is that they weren't worried about the carousing in those days. Me Too would have gotten him now, but they were afraid of giving the Pentagon to someone who had a drinking problem.
Absolutely, and I think all of these nominees we're going to talk about, they all create a new test or a new standard, or at least an assessment of whether this should be a standard going forward.
And now there's a Tanden trap, or a Tanden test. I like the Tanden trap, which is if what you say on social media cages you in when it comes time to be confirmed.
Yeah, especially if you're going specifically after the people who you need to confirm you. Now, people say, oh, other people have had mean tweets or Rick Grenell or whatever. But if you're going specifically after the senators, I mean, those are the people, this is your job interview. And if you have insulted those people, it is less likely that they're going to be inclined to support you.
This is why my ambition in life, Tevi, is to be the Consul General in Bermuda. It has got no Senate confirmation, and I will settle for deputy counsel to the president because that comes with a 4 handicap. Actually, it's down to a 3 handicap. I was talking to Dick Hauser yesterday. He's got down to a 3. And so I only want to have jobs in the future that have nothing to do with confirmation. I've been on the radio too long and tweeted too much. And everybody who tweets now, do you think they'll tweet with Tanden in the background?
Look, I've always thought about what tweeting means. And back in the 80s, we used to talk about the paper trail, right? After Bulwark went down, I knew a whole bunch of smart Federalist Society conservative lawyers, you know them too, who started talking, oh, well, I got to watch my paper trail if I want to get a judicial nomination someday.
They started writing about the commercial code, right? They all of a sudden, they were deep into the bowels of contract law and testamentary aversion. It was funny. Who else has gone down, and what other tests have emerged, Tevi, in the past?
Well, if you look at the Clinton administration, he was determined to have a female attorney general. And the first two he tried, or Zoe Baird and Kimba Wood, they both had the nanny tax problems, meaning they had nannies, but they didn't pay income taxes on those people, which is against the law, but it was a fairly regular practice. I think it still is, but it's an unfortunate practice. And I always tell people who have political ambitions to make sure they pay that nanny tax. So both of these women go down as a result. And Clinton is committed to having a female attorney general no matter what. And so he finds someone that he doesn't know very well, Janet Reno, and she becomes the attorney general. Clinton doesn't like her much. She sticks for all 8 years. And Clinton doesn't like her performance either on the Waco raid with David Koresh, where I believe 85 people died. And then also in terms of the Whitewater scandal, he feels she doesn't handle it great. And the result is that Clinton gets impeached as a result of the Monica Lewinsky revelations.
That's wild. Now, Tevi, this is your Jeopardy moment. And don't go all Sean Connery on Alex Trebek on Saturday Night Live on me. I want to throw Burt Lance at you. I purposely did not look up Burt Lance because I don't remember what got him in trouble and got him booted. What was that?
So that was a banking scandal. William Safire was the guy who went after him. And it turned out in the end that he really hadn't done what everything he'd said. He wasn't quite guilty, but there was enough of an appearance of a problem that when Safire started going on after him with very rough columns in the New York Times, that the political pressure was too great. But he was already there. He left. He resigned after getting there. But the really interesting story in that is that Lance and Safire reconciled because Lance sent Safire a biblical quotation And then Sapphire sent him one back. And then they started becoming friends. They would have lunch together. They would talk politics and gossip together. So I think that's actually a nice reconciliation story.
So, but there is no Lance test, right? It was too amorphous. If I can't remember why someone gets booted, like the nanny tax or the Tandon tweets, it's not really effective as a trap or a test going forward. Are there any other ones out there?
Well, I think you had, let's see, so the Tandon one is now about what you say. And then in the Bush administration, you kind of have the Puzder, the Trump administration, the Puzder test.
Oh, old divorce allegations, no matter if they're not true. Yep.
Right. So, but that has huge implications as well, because Puzder leaves and then Alex Acosta comes in, and within 2 years, I guess, he gets caught up in the problems related to the Epstein deal. And so he gets knocked out, and
don't be a prosecutor. That's another good rule now. Don't be a prosecutor. So Tevi, where have you collected all these? At National Review? Where's the column? I read it, but I can't remember where it was.
So actually, when this happened, I had to be pretty quick. So I just wrote out some thoughts. I sent it to your producer and some other producers, and then FoxNews.com wrote this up in an article interviewing me. But I did not write my own op-ed.
Okay, so it's at Fox News. So Tevi, just stepping back, you're a presidential historian. I think Joe Biden has spoke less to the public in his first 40 days than any other president. Do you think I'm right?
I absolutely think you're right. He is somewhat absent. We don't really know what he's like in an environment with the press asking him questions. And I just wonder how long it's sustainable. Yesterday,
Dan Crenshaw said on the show that the president of the United States has got, I want to quote it correctly, diminished cognitive capacity. Do you think that's been proven?
You know, I remember back when the American Psychiatric Association made an assessment of Goldwater without actually assessing him, and it's not my job to say. He's not as voluble and glib as he was back in the 80s when the story about him was that he wouldn't stop talking. So it could be wisdom of the years, or it could be diminished capacity. There's a reason why he talks less today. And,
you don't doubt for a moment. He's got to be the least we've seen of a president in modern times in his first 40 days.
Yeah, but there's also a strategic component to this. I remember that there was a New York Times reporter was talking to a senior Biden official and said, "Who would have thought your basement strategy would have been effective?" And the Biden advisor said, "We did." So I mean, there is a benefit to keeping a president, if the media will help you and shield you on this, keeping the president out of the limelight could actually lead to fewer controversies. Because whenever a president opens his mouth, even if they're brilliant and wise and fantastic, they will say some things that some people disagree with.
And he called Texans Neanderthals yesterday. I mean, calling a whole state Neanderthals, that's not very good politics. Hey, Tevi Troy, it is always a pleasure to talk to a presidential historian of Tevi's rank. Thank you, my friend. Coming up after the break at the bottom of the hour, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo going to light it up this morning. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Born to Lead and Salem Now.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
A family was thrown off the plane by Frontier. The family claims it was because they wanted an 18-month-old masked. The Frontier claims it's because after multiple requests, the family would not wear masks. This is the New York Times, New York Post, and many other places. Every other passenger that I read about, it doesn't mean every other passenger, but every other passenger that I read about said that they were masked the entire time. They were part of a Hasidic Jewish group, and all of them are seen wearing masks in the videos taken on the plane by people's smartphones. I think Frontier is an independent airline. And according to some, a reference was made to, we really got the Jews or something like that amongst the people there. They some of the crew actually clapped when they left. It's a troubling story if unless Frontier is telling the complete truth. Frontier looks ugly in this story.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Peter, is there a crisis on the border?
No, there isn't a crisis. There are 5 crises. There's a humanitarian crisis, public health crisis, economic crisis, national security crisis, and a law enforcement crisis. And when I say an economic crisis, what by that I mean we're having an influx of illegal immigrants that's going to harm the job prospects of millions of people who are currently unemployed because of the pandemic in addition to other things, and they're going to be competing with those folks. As far as national security is concerned, whenever you don't enforce the border, you don't know who's coming across, and ICE has said, and Department of Homeland Security has said a number of times that they've found all manner of folk coming across the border, Iranians, Chinese, and others, and we don't have a handle on that right now. It's a law enforcement crisis because all the data shows that with respect to serious crimes, murders, rapes, robberies, illegal aliens generally have higher crime rates than do Native Americans. As far as public health is concerned, it's self-evident. We have to have proof that we are COVID-free when we enter the United States, lawfully, on a plane or through the traditional entry process. But thousands of illegal immigrants are coming across. We don't even know who's coming across, but we're waving them across without any COVID tests. They could be transmitting COVID or other diseases. We don't have a handle on that. They have pretty much declared that they can come across. There's an amnesty. They'll get free health care. This entices a lot of people to make an arduous journey, be exploited by the cartels, by coyotes. This is reprehensible what's happening. There's one objective here. We all know what the objective is. The principal immediate objective is turn Texas blue.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. COVID has ripped a path of destruction through the world. Millions dead. Economy shattered. The United States has had a brutal experience, but nothing like Central America, where, look, the reported deaths are highest in the United States because we have the most advanced medical system in the world, and we know when someone dies and COVID is in their system, so we can report a COVID comorbidity. They can't do that in Brazil and in Central America and Mexico. They just can't do it. They don't have the hospitals. They don't have the time. They don't have the technology. But we do know when people are starving to death, and that's happening in Honduras right now. Why should you help? Why should you help in Honduras? Through Food for the Poor and the banners at HughHewitt.com. I asked my friend Angel Alom, and I've known Angel a long time, and I trust Food for the Poor. That's why the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I made the largest gift we've ever made to Food for the Poor this year, because I know the need is, in this COVID year, it's so off of the charts. So many people are hungry, so many people are dying, and Angel said this.
The answer is pretty straightforward. You see, in the United States, we have 1.8 million nonprofit organizations, and of these, less than 24,000 are actually international. So we have directed our attention to countries where the government is not as wealthy and where they're not anywhere near the number of organizations that are able to help the poor.
They just don't have the infrastructure, not for profit or economic. No one can help. Actually, you just got to get the rice and beans there first. So this is not glamorous stuff. Food for the Poor has been doing this for more than 70 years. They are one of the most efficient, if not the most efficient, international aid organization anywhere in the United States. And I trust them completely. They are faith-based. They are originally Catholic. Now they serve with evangelicals and Catholic. They work through the local church often, and especially in Honduras, both evangelical, Catholic, non-denominational, LDS. Whoever is there to help, they will get the rice and beans to distribute. But they need your money. And so please go to HughHewitt.com and click on that banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. Please do it today. Do it early. They'll be able to adjust their April deliveries based upon their March contributions. The number is 855-359-4673. 855-359-4673. Or I think the best way is to go to HughHewitt.com and click on that banner at the top. I want to remind you, I'm working 6 days. I'm always working. I never don't work. But I am doing Ask a Host tomorrow because it's fun. It's different. I've never done this before. The folks at Salem said, hey, will you sit down with a small group of listeners? A Zoom call. Very few people. And just answer anything. People like to know more about the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt. They want to know. She's not on the Zoom call. She is shy. She doesn't do many events with me. I don't think she's ever been on the road with me. She doesn't. I could never have run for office because I'd have been alone and people would have thought I was single. She hates public events, even though she's wonderful and beautiful and smiles much better than I do. We should go out with The Way You Look Tonight. That's her song. But maybe she'll make an appearance on the Zoom call. If somebody says, will the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt make an appearance? Maybe she will. No, she won't. I'm not going to promise that. But I will answer any question you want. You got to go to askahost.com. Limited number are left. You have to do it today or tomorrow morning because we're doing it tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Also want to remind you about Born to Lead. Jim Boeheim is an amazing basketball coach. March Madness is ahead. So he went out to, Coach K, a bunch of these people who are great basketball coaches who inspire and change the lives of young people. Jim Boeheim is really unique. And you'll know why when you watch Born to Lead. You have to head to salemnow.com. Use my name, Hugh, for a discount. salemnow.com. And again, they're not paying me for this, but I am worried about my audience. If you've been sitting around thinking about refinancing and you didn't do anything, look, you're going to pay a little bit more, but you're not going to pay anything like what you're going to pay a year from now. This nightmare of a bill that's going to pass today, they're carving out some bad parts of it. So it started out at 1.9 trillion. Maybe they'll get it down to 1.7 trillion when they're done. But the price of oil is now at $65 a barrel. The 10-year Treasury is up to 1.55%. And stock markets around the world have reeled for 3 weeks. For 3 weeks because they've seen the bill and they know what it is. It's a handout to entrenched government employees and public employee unions. It's not a relief bill. It's a blue state bailout. There you go. There's the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt song. Go call Andrew and Todd.com at 888-888-1172. I'll see you at askahost.com on Saturday, but coming up after the break, Mike Pompeo, don't go anywhere. The former Secretary of State joins me.
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another $1 trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, and the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
He's Andrew Cuomo. He's like a mafia don. He doesn't go out of anywhere unless it's in a box. Tell us, what's the truth, Joe Piscopo?
You know, Seb, he is. He's the Terminator of politics. And he really is. He'll be back. I'll be back. I mean, you know, and then I love everybody's making the mafia references because he's Italian. I don't get offended by it, but he's like the Salazzo character. Remember?
Yes, Virgil Salazzo.
I don't like violence, Michael. It's bad for business, you know? I mean, and then or how about this line? You want to see Governor Cuomo say that the bad news for me and bad news for you. You know, it's like a character. However, let me put this caveat out there, if I may, my friend. When I knew Andrew 30 years ago, 20 years ago, he was always nice. He was always cordial. He was always a gentleman. That's the Andrew Cuomo I know. I don't know who this guy is now, you know? And
really?
Michael Goodwin. Yeah, honestly. And
so you say he's changed?
I don't look. I talked to Kieran Lawler, who's up in Albany, one of the assemblymen, and Kieran said, "Joe, why are you saying nice things about Andrew Cuomo?" I said, "I'm just saying when I met him, he was nice." Then I talked to Michael Goodwin this morning, that we know and love from the New York Post, and Michael says he has changed in office. I do know this about him. First of all, he was always nice to me, and I always open the mic up to join me on the air. But I'm not Seb Gorka. I like to think I'm a good radio guy, but I'm not. He said to me, he goes, "Joe, I love you, but you know Dr. Gorka." He told me that. No, not really, but the thing is, what he did was with the women was one thing, and he apologized, and we have to accept that. I think easy for me to say, but it was nice that he did that. Not, you know what this means? The Italians go like this, you and the Italians go like this. They not one question from any reporter about the nursing home deaths.
Right.
Did you notice that?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Speaking of studies, one of them was led by the black Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, who made the argument that unskilled illegal aliens pose competition to unskilled black and brown workers. And Coretta Scott King once wrote a letter, I believe it was you who brought my attention to that. I wrote a letter to Congress urging them not to relax sanctions against employers who knowingly hire illegal aliens because of the threat that they pose to black and brown workers. That was Coretta Scott King writing that letter.
And there were a number of others, Barbara Jordan and others, of course, but this was at a time when many of our black leaders actually had true adult, sane concerns about the prospects of African Americans. These days, I don't want to cast any aspersions on anyone, but if you take a look at our so-called black leaders, they're all in uniform lockstep with the principal interests of the Democratic Party, as opposed to the average American and average black American. We have had hearing after hearing at the Civil Rights Commission. There have been numerous hearings before Congress on this. The evidence is plain. Yes, you're going to get contrary arguments from people. I would urge your listeners, take a look at the data. One of the pieces of evidence before the Civil Rights Commission is that 40% of the full 18-point decline in labor rates among blacks prior to the Trump administration came from competition from illegal immigrants. That's astonishing. That was turned around under Trump. We actually had a complete reversal. We had the lowest unemployment rates among blacks in history, and especially among young blacks. And labor participation rates for young blacks was going through the roof. And now, just because Trump implemented this, we're reversing this, and we're damaging the prospects in a time when we can't afford it in the midst of a pandemic.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined now by the former Secretary of State, the 70th Secretary of State in the United States, Michael Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm great. How are you today?
Good. I enjoyed being with you on Tuesday night via Zoom, and I must say the exchange between you and Henry Kissinger was telling. Dr. Kissinger's esteem for you is significant. Your esteem for him is significant. I kind of thought that was a sort of passing of a baton from one geostrategist to another. Were you surprised by Dr. Kissinger, both his energy, his insight, and his kindness towards you?
His kindness towards me, Hugh, has been remarkable, not just this past week, but for the entire time, in my time in Congress, and then more importantly, when I was Secretary of State. I called on him a number of times for helping me think through particular problem sets, reminding me of particular histories. He was always incredibly valuable. In that sense, I wasn't surprised by his sharpness. I have seen that for all the time I have known him. He is a historic figure, a remarkable man, and someone who is still very much engaged on the world stage and was prepared to help me and the Trump administration think about problem sets in ways that were incredibly important, incredibly creative, and helped us deliver on our American First Forward policy.
You know, I'm going to make that available from the Nixon seminar for everyone because it was so remarkable to see Dr. Kissinger today. But I almost went through the Zoom screen to grab Congressman Gallagher when he asked Dr. Kissinger about AI, because I figured, look, the guy's 97. He's not going to be really up to speed on AI. And he said, well, I've been meeting with Eric Schmidt every Sunday for 4 years on it. And I said, oh, gosh, never underestimate Kissinger, right?
It was truly remarkable. I think it made everyone chuckle to see that he is still hard at it, still trying to learn himself. I think that's a lesson for everybody. He is still trying to make sure that he has the best information, as much knowledge as anybody, so that he can apply all the skills that he developed all of his years. If each of us would take that on as a practice, a professional practice, I think we'd all be better off.
Well, I want to learn a few things about CPAC and about your ambitions this morning. First of all, great speech at CPAC. I played a lot of it on Monday of this week. What did you make of CPAC? Because, of course, the narrative, the elite media, Manhattan Beltway media elite narrative is that the Republican Party is shattered into 1,000 shards and they're at each other's throats. I didn't see that. What did you see at CPAC?
I think we saw at CPAC precisely what we saw on November 3rd, which is that there are tens of millions of Americans who deeply believe that the policies that this administration put in place for 4 years were the right thing for people all across America. I had a chance to walk around the hotel for a bit and shake hands and meet a few people from the West Coast, people from the heartland, like Kansas, places like Kansas, my home. Every one of them understood that this is going to be a truly testing 4 years. They're going to reverse a great deal of the good policy work that we did that had made lives better for ordinary people all across America. And they're about to embark on a foreign policy as well that won't put America first, but rather will begin to value globalism for the sake of globalism, which is much to the detriment of the American people.
Now, I get asked all the time after that speech and after the Nixon seminar, is Secretary Pompeo going to run for president in 2024? I sent him to the Hannity show where you say, I'm always up for a good fight. And then I say, hell yes, he's running. Can you be more explicit than you were with Hannity? Do you expect to run in 2024?
Hugh, I love you, brother, but no. Look, I gave that answer to Sean because it's the truth, and I think anybody who's watched me and my wife Susan these last 10 years and then saw my time in service as a soldier knows that I care deeply about America, and I want to do my best to give back to this country that's done so much for me. And so I'm going to work really hard these next 2 years to continue to put forward the right ideas for America, help candidates get elected in 2022. And then in the months and years ahead, we'll see what life holds for 2024.
All right. Well, if you won't tell Hannity, you're not going to tell me. But I nevertheless still tell people, hell yes, he's running. Let me talk to you about issues now. There is an American contractor dead at Al-Assad. After the first attack by the Shia-based militias that are backed by Iran, the Biden administration did strike an Iranian target in Syria. Nothing has happened after the second attack. Is that a mistake, Mr. Pompeo?
I saw some remarks from the Pentagon spokesperson yesterday where he was repeatedly asked about this attack, and he called it a Shia-backed attack, and the reporter was befuddled. The first rule is you have to identify the perpetrator, and the perpetrator here is almost certainly the Iranian regime. And that's the policy that the Trump administration put in place. We made clear to the Iranians that we weren't going to allow you to use some knuckleheads in the desert to harm and threaten Americans and not hold the Iranian regime itself accountable. And so I don't know precisely the strike that they took after the first attack. It certainly didn't demonstrate the effect that they would have hoped, which was to deter further attacks. You have to go to the source. You have to hold accountable the people responsible. And the people responsible for putting American lives at risk in Syria, in Iraq today, are the Iranian regime. And so I hope that they'll respond in a way that protects Americans. So far, the evidence that they're going to do anything forceful with respect to Iran is not apparent.
Now, Mr. Secretary, as someone who had family deployed at al-Assad when the ballistic missiles were launched, they got off in time. I am always concerned. I wanted the Americans to respond to every Iranian provocation because that kept them in their box. I think that the families and the troops who are stationed in the Middle East right now want an immediate response. Is that what you heard from the soldiers with whom you used to serve and other branches of the service in the area? They want immediate responses?
Of course they do, Hugh. And more importantly, they deserve that, and America needs it. It is the duty of every leader, and I spent an awful lot of time, a lot of sleepless nights as CIA director and Secretary of State, making sure that my officers at the CIA or my diplomats at the State Department had every security element they needed, and that our policies, the things that we did, the actions that we took all across the world, deterred others, deterred our adversaries from even contemplating attacking them. I was blessed. I didn't have an officer or a diplomat who was killed during my time in office. That was partly due to the great work of my team and then the grace of God. But we took this seriously. We took the responsibility to protect our soldiers and our diplomats all across the world seriously, and we did it with good effect.
Now, I don't know whether I should be alarmed by this or less alarmed by this, but yesterday, Congressman Dan Crenshaw remarked upon President Biden having diminished cognitive capacity because he called Texans Neanderthals. But I do worry about who is deciding whether or not to respond. I don't know that the president is leaning into this. I know Robert Gates on this show said not only was he wrong about every foreign policy decision for the past generation, but that he had a bad relationship with the Pentagon. That was news when he said it on my show last year. It didn't get a lot of pickup. But I've been thinking about that since. Do you think the president has a good working relationship with now Secretary Austin? Do you think he has a suspicion of the use of military force?
Well, I don't know his relationship precisely with all the folks at the Pentagon. I would guess that it is varied. But I do know this. I do know that President Biden, when he was a vice president and a senator, often got it wrong with respect to thinking about how to use American power to deter American adversaries and to protect and preserve freedoms all across America. I watched it in policy after policy where they apologized for America instead of defending the basic freedoms that we loved. And when it came time for preserving and protecting other democracies around the world, they were often willing to give in to the Chinese Communist Party or the Iranians or others who don't share our view of life. And when push comes to shove, aim to undermine the very democracies that America has been so blessed to have for all these years.
Now, I am concerned as well about their early actions. One of his first executive orders was to reverse your move and President Trump's move on the Confucius Institutes. Now, a lot of Steelers fans listen, so they won't know what a Confucius Institute is, Secretary, so you have to explain to them. But that was a very bad signal to send, I think. What did you make of it?
The Chinese Communist Party presents the most existential threat to the American way of life of any other adversary. Xi Jinping and the leadership there have a hegemonic intent. They want to undermine our way of life. The Confucius Institutes themselves are something that the Chinese have built out here in the United States. Frankly, Hugh, under Democrat and Republican presidents, this hasn't been a partisan failure. It's been a bipartisan failure. And they're in our schools. They're trying to use their access to Western freedoms to propagandize inside of our schools all across America. So many colleges had these things called Confucius Institutes, which were largely an extension of the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese MSS, their security apparatus. The Trump administration issued an executive order. We began to make the case to schools to close them down. Many of them did, and immediately upon entry into government, these folks shut it down and continued to encourage the Confucius Institutes to be built out. It is dangerous for America, and I hope that they'll rethink that. I hope they'll see what we saw is happening inside of these schools. And frankly, I hope every school that has a Confucius Institute will take it upon themselves to protect their students from this threat.
Mr. Secretary, if we elect our next president based upon who the Chinese dislike the most, the Chinese communists, you'll win running away because they really hate you. Every time you show up and say something, the CCP puts out one of their talking heads to attack you. Are you going to just get used to that?
Hugh, I've watched the Chinese Communist Party react with personal attacks on me. They've sanctioned me and my family. I think it's a demonstration of weakness. I think they can see that when leaders are prepared to push back against them, they don't have many answers other than to attack that person individually and personally. You don't get used to it other than you do begin to recognize when you have hit on something that matters an awful lot, whether it is calling them out for the Wuhan virus and their failure to protect the United States and the world from the virus or spread from their country, or the terrible activities that are taking place, the 1 million Uyghur Muslims that are in internment camps and have suffered forced sterilizations, and all the horrors that are taking place in the West. I think when leaders talk about that, you can see the Chinese response, and you know when they are sensing weakness and you've attacked at a point which really hurts them.
Now, Congressman Michael Waltz, and I always have to note, my son works for him, so I have to always disclose that, but Congressman Michael Waltz put out a resolution calling on his members, his colleagues in Congress, to join in demanding that the United States boycott the 2022 Olympics in China. Do you agree with that resolution, Secretary Pompeo?
We were working on this very issue during the final months of the Trump administration, trying to figure out the best approach. The approach would impose the most cost on the Chinese Communist Party. And so our first push was to develop a coalition around the world to convince the IOC to move those games. They ought not to be held there. I hope that our athletes get a chance to participate in the Olympics. They very much deserve that. But in the end, we cannot allow American athletes to travel to Beijing and reward the Chinese Communist Party, all the while that they are doing all of the nasty activity that they're engaged in, all of the malign activity they're engaged in around the world. The world ought to unite. The Olympics are an expression of freedom and athletic talent, and to hold them in Beijing is completely inappropriate.
Now, I also have to disclose, I work for NBC. NBC is scheduled to broadcast those Olympics, so that's a conflict of interest on my part. The Washington Post will probably be covering. That's a conflict of interest on my part. But I'm going to ask you anyway. Does everyone who facilitates these games and every sponsor of these games, whether it's McDonald's or GM, whoever likes to go, because the games get a big audience and people sell a lot of stuff, are they participating indirectly or directly in the genocide that you and Tony Blinken, your successor, agree is underway in China? They are trying to wipe out the Uyghur people, and we have to bluntly ask CEOs everywhere to ask themselves the question, do they want blood on their hands?
Hugh, I've done that. I've talked to CEOs from the entertainment industry, from the technology industry, from manufacturing companies. I called them. I spoke with them personally. I wanted to share with them to make sure there was no mistake, that they knew what was taking place there. And I wanted to urge them, don't be part of that. We know the history of the 1930s. We know how many senior leaders turned the other eye when there was a Holocaust taking place in Germany. The kind of things that's happening in China today are reminiscent of that. And I think senior leaders, governmental leaders, business leaders, leaders of nonprofits, all need to take seriously their responsibility and make sure that what the things that they're doing, the activities they're engaged in, don't contribute either directly or indirectly into furthering the Chinese Communist Party's capacity to wipe out this entire class of people.
Sure. And by the way, I don't know why Americans don't get it about the Uyghurs. Maybe because we don't understand it. I know you made efforts to understand it. Do you think American media discounts the Uyghur people, that they just don't value them, that for example, the way they value any other ethnic minority that is represented in the United States in large numbers?
Hugh, I think this is changing. I think it took American leaders who were prepared to call this out, and I have seen this. I've seen the tide turning on this issue. I now see the world more alert to this. The Canadians have acted. The Dutch have acted. I'm hopeful the British will take action. I actually see people becoming more aware of this. I hope the Muslim world, I hope Islamic countries will come to see this too, that these are their brothers and sisters in faith. I hope they too will begin to call that out. We worked on this to the extent you can. You can make the case to people of what's really happening there. I think people of all faiths will come to understand that this is unacceptable, and I'm convinced that the world will hold China accountable for what it is that's taking place there today.
Two last questions, Mr. Secretary. Germany and Turkey present unique problems. Germany is building this Nord Stream 2 despite your best efforts, and the Biden administration doesn't seem to care, which is going to undercut Ukraine and strengthen Russia. And Turkey has bought Russian anti-aircraft. Can we really think of NATO as NATO anymore if Germany and Turkey, are they really allies if they're going to help out Russia?
So Turkey is a complicated situation for sure. We imposed an enormous sanction. We denied the Turks the capacity to either manufacture or fly F-35 aircraft. We slowed them down a bit. They but they continue to persist in buying Russian aircraft. That is inconsistent with our obligations to NATO, and we made clear that we would impose continued costs on them if they headed down that path. Germany's a fine ally. The Germans' challenge is that they have not been prepared to spend German taxpayer resources and to build a military with German young men and women that was consistent with their power and their resources. And so President Trump put as much pressure as he could on them to continue to make sure they weren't free riding on the United States inside of NATO. And, you know, this pipeline is a complicated issue. We concluded ultimately that this was a pipeline that had strategic importance and was going to benefit the Russians, so we put sanctions on companies that were engaged in it. We slowed this pipeline down tremendously. It's multiple years behind. This administration is going to allow the pipeline to continue to be built, creating European jobs, and they shut down a pipeline in the United States that destroys American jobs. It's a real head-scratcher, Hugh.
Last question. I've asked this of a lot of people. Do you personally expect President Biden to be leading the Democrats in 2024 in the election of that November?
You know, I'll just leave that to the Democrat Party to decide who their leader is. I'm very focused on making sure that the conservative movement and the ideas that I worked so hard on alongside President Trump for 4 years continues to advance.
Have you stood up a website yet, Mr. Secretary, so people can know what you're up to and what you're doing?
Nope. I have a Twitter account at Mike Pompeo. That's all I've got for today.
All right. For the time being, Secretary Pompeo, come back early and often. Always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Hugh. So long, sir. To travel to Beijing and reward the Chinese Communist Party, all the while that they are doing all of the nasty activity that they're engaged in, all of the malign activity they're engaged in around the world. The world ought to unite. The Olympics are an expression of freedom and athletic talent, and to hold them in Beijing is completely inappropriate.
Now, welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. Here is the conclusion of my interview with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo from just now.
We know the history of the 1930s. We know how many senior leaders turned the other eye when there was a Holocaust taking place in Germany. The kind of things that's happening in China today are reminiscent of that. And I think senior leaders, governmental leaders, business leaders, leaders of nonprofits, all need to take seriously their responsibility and make sure that what the things that they're doing, the activities they're engaged in, don't contribute either directly or indirectly into furthering the Chinese Communist Party's capacity to wipe out this entire class of people.
Sure. And by the way, I don't know why Americans don't get it about the Uyghurs. Maybe because we don't understand it. I know you made efforts to understand it. Do you think American media discounts the Uyghur people, that they just don't value them, that for example, the way they value any other ethnic minority that is represented in the United States in large numbers?
Hugh, I think this is changing. I think it took American leaders who were prepared to call this out, and I have seen this. I've seen the tide turning on this issue. I now see the world more alert to this. The Canadians have acted. The Dutch have acted. I'm hopeful the British will take action. I actually see people becoming more aware of this. I hope the Muslim world, I hope Islamic countries will come to see this too, that these are their brothers and sisters in faith. I hope they too will begin to call that out. We worked on this to the extent you can. You can make the case to people of what's really happening there. I think people of all faiths will come to understand that this is unacceptable, and I'm convinced that the world will hold China accountable for what it is that's taking place there today.
Two last questions, Mr. Secretary. Germany and Turkey present unique problems. Germany is building this Nord Stream 2 despite your best efforts, and the Biden administration doesn't seem to care, which is going to undercut Ukraine and strengthen Russia. And Turkey has bought Russian anti-aircraft. Can we really think of NATO as NATO anymore if Germany and Turkey, are they really allies if they're going to help out Russia?
So Turkey is a complicated situation for sure. we imposed an enormous sanction. We denied the Turks the capacity to either manufacture or fly F-35 aircraft. We slowed them down a bit. But they continue to persist in buying Russian aircraft. That is inconsistent with our obligations to NATO, and we made clear that we would impose continued costs on them if they headed down that path. Germany's a fine ally. The Germans' challenge is that they have not been prepared to spend German taxpayer resources and to build a military with German young men and women that was consistent with their power and their resources. And so President Trump put as much pressure as he could on them to continue to make sure they weren't free riding on the United States inside of NATO. And, this pipeline is a complicated issue. We concluded ultimately that this was a pipeline that had strategic importance and was going to benefit the Russians, so we put sanctions on companies that were engaged in it. We slowed this pipeline down tremendously. It's multiple years behind. This administration is going to allow the pipeline to continue to be built, creating European jobs, and they shut down a pipeline in the United States that destroys American jobs. It's a real head-scratcher, Hugh.
Last question. I've asked this of a lot of people. Do you personally expect President Biden to be leading the Democrats in 2024 in the election of that November?
I'll just leave that to the Democrat Party to decide who their leader is. I'm very focused on making sure that the conservative movement and the ideas that I worked so hard on alongside President Trump for 4 years continues to advance.
Have you stood up a website yet, Mr. Secretary, so people can know what you're up to and what you're doing?
Nope. I have a Twitter account at Mike Pompeo. That's all I've got for today.
All right. For the time being, Secretary Pompeo, come back early and often. Always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Hugh. So long.
I think we're going to be hearing a lot from Mike Pompeo. I think he is definitely running, but he won't say that. And he has not told me that. That's not breaking any news. He told Sean Hannity he's always up for a good fight, but I think he got a little, maybe he didn't want to go that far out there and people read too much into that. But stuff happens. I don't want to get ahead of President Trump, obviously, but I think you can't wait on President Trump. We'll wait and see. You can't wait any longer for askahost.com because I'm doing it tomorrow night at 8 p.m. So if you want to be part of that small group, you have to go over to askahost.com. Can you Steelers fans remember? It's 8 letters, askahost.com. Askahost.com. I don't expect a lot of Steelers fans, but I wouldn't mind if 20 Browns fans all came and we talked about the Browns. That could happen. I don't think so, but it could happen. Anything can happen at Ask a Host, anything at all. And I want to close this hour. Dr. Arnn and the Hillsdale Dialogue is coming up as we talk about John Winthrop, which you may not know much about, but you're going to learn a lot about John Winthrop in the next hour. But I do want to remind you of Food for the Poor. It's a desperate, desperate situation in Central America, nowhere more so than in Honduras. And if you've got $10, if you've got $100, if you've got $250, you can get a lot of rice and beans to a country that is on the edge of mass starvation. And that's because the economy has crumbled, tourism is dead, people are fleeing north, people with skill sets are trying to get across our border, and the people that do the work, listen to Angel Aloma explain why it's so hard to get anything up and running in Honduras.
The answer is pretty straightforward. You see, in the United States, we have 1.8 million nonprofit organizations, and of these, less than 24,000 are actually international. So we have directed our attention to countries where the government is not as wealthy and where they're not anywhere near the number of organizations that are able to help the poor.
So will you go to HughHewitt.com and go to the top to the red banner, Give Food, Get Hope, Give to Food for the Poor, and click on it and give your best gift, or call 855-359-4673, 855-359-4673. Come back. The third hour of the Hugh Hewitt Show, straight ahead.
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another $1 trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, and the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
I have a list of 32 questions that you should ask any relative or friend, and send the list to any relative or friend to find out if that relative or friend is a liberal or a leftist. It's powerful stuff. I'm going to read to you the questions. I actually read it last night. I read it when it's published, because when you see your work published, it looks different, as it were. And here, I'm going to call it up from, well, I would if my computer worked. It renders that difficult. That's too bad. All right, I'll get it up somehow. There are 32 questions, and I worked very hard in phrasing it in such a way as to make it completely clear so that the reader does not have to ask, well, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? And then we can work on it. And, well, you know what the magic is, my friends, when you can't do something on your computer. What you do is turn it off, reboot it. Your Windows, if it's Windows, your Windows system wants to be renewed. It is a spiritual act on the part of your computer.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
We find out 2 weeks ago from his assistant on that call to Democrat lawmakers, oh yeah, we hid the evidence from the feds. Joe, if you hid the evidence from the feds of a crime, if I did, guess what? The feds are on our door at 6 a.m. with AR-15s. Is this man made of Teflon? Is he the new Teflon Don?
No, I got to tell you, honestly, and you know, it's so tough for me now. So I talk to you as a Salem brother, you know. I try to stick up for the Italians, and I'm getting killed there. We got Fauci, we got Pelosi, we got de Blasio, we got Cuomo. I'm getting killed over here, my friend. I'm just telling you. It's like,
it's got to be tough.
It's tough now. And I want to say something nice about Dr. Fauci's phone. They'll call up. Everybody calls. They'll tell me what's up. And with Andrew, though, he is a political animal along the lines, the old world political animal, and I mean that he's very savvy. He's Nancy Pelosi, he's Chuck Schumer. You may not like these people. They are vicious when it comes to politics. You know that. So I don't think you ever count them out. I think, I'm telling you what, even with all those nursing home deaths, and the hearts go out to every family. Janice Dean, can you get more of a sweet person than Janice Dean? How great is she? And what she had to go through, that alone, I think Andrew owes an apology for that as well. I'm amazed that they didn't.
That's the point. Where's his apology to the families, to the loved ones, like Janice Dean, who lost her parents-in-law to the COVID virus because of this governor?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, and the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Well, my question is, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about systemic racism, and I mentioned one of your nuggets that actually more white people, unarmed white people, are killed than black people. And you say, of course they are, because there's more white people in this country than black people. So what's the answer to that? I didn't know how to come back.
Real simple. White people are what percentage of the population? Around 61%. What percentage of the homicides are committed by white people? 50%. Meaning they commit, as a percentage of their population, less murders than blacks do at 13%. We commit almost half of the homicides at 13%. So at 13%, we're far more likely to be an offender and a victim of a homicide. A young black man is anywhere from 7 to 10 times more likely, Larry, to be the victim of a homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black man. The leading cause of death for young white men, Larry,
Past few days, when I've been at that window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined. What he imagined was important because he was an early pilgrim, an early freedom man. He journeyed here on what today we'd call a little wooden boat. And like the other pilgrims, he was looking for a home that would be free. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still. And
Morning glory, America. That is the great Ronald Reagan. This is the Hillsdale Dialogue on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Once a week we go big, we go back sometimes with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, and one of his colleagues this week, Dr. Brad Berzer, who is a professor of history and the Russell Amos Kirk Chair in American Studies at Hillsdale College. He's from Notre Dame in Indiana. We'll forgive him that. He's the co-founder of the Imaginative Conservative, and I did not know until I prepared for this show that he's the author of American Cicero. Charles Carroll of Carrollton. I need to read that because I've always admired Charles Carroll as the most influential Catholic of the framing. So good morning, Dr. Arnn. Good morning, Dr. Berzer. Dr. Arnn, what did you think when you heard Ronald Reagan talking about City on a Hill again?
Isn't that beautiful? And is it from his farewell address?
Yes, I've looked out these windows all these 8 years, yes.
Yeah, it's just awesome. You know, he had a way, didn't he?
He did. And Dr. Berzer, you have a way. You've really written quite extensively to Dr. Arnn and I in preparation of this Hillsdale dialogue on John Winthrop. You know, I lived in Winthrop House for 3 years at Harvard, and I had no idea who John Winthrop was. So that's down on me and on Harvard. Quite a remarkable thing. What did you think when you heard Reagan talking about John Winthrop?
Well, my soul sailed. It was great. And good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Yeah, I mean, it was just beautiful. I love the way that Reagan captures it. It captures so much of Reagan's optimism, so much of what conservatism was and should be. I mean, he nailed it. It's just beautiful.
And will be again. I just got done speaking with Mike Pompeo for half an hour. And Dr. Arnn, this is not on topic. I just wonder what you think about him and his positioning in the Republican Party. He was bringing a hammer to the Chinese Communist Olympics in 2022. He wants to shatter those. Something I think Reagan would approve of right now because they're in the midst of a genocide of the Uyghur people.
Yeah, they've just crushed Hong Kong. It's the saddest thing. It's such a beautiful place, and it's just become another communist-controlled republic of a sort. Yeah, Pompeo is an important guy, and you know his friend Tom Cotton is an important guy, and Josh Hawley is an important guy. And I'm going to offend somebody by stopping Mike Pence. Those guys are all positioned, and I was saying to myself, because it is a good idea to look around for something optimistic, because there's a lot of bad stuff right now. If you just think of the field that might be put together right after the primaries are over is when the presidential race starts, that is strong. There's a lot of people who figured out a lot of things, and the issues that they're dwelling on are very different than the way the race started in 2016.
You're right. And we're going to be talking about the Chinese Communist Party a lot. But a lot of it has got to proceed from an understanding of who we are as a people, and that's where John Winthrop comes in. And that's where I want to go. Dr. Berzer, first of all, thanks for writing about Charles Carroll. I didn't know that book was out there. Why were you drawn to Charles Carroll, and who is he for the benefit? It's a bonus round in this week's Hillsdale Dialogue.
Oh, the bonus round. Well, yeah, ISI Books was doing a whole series on forgotten founders, and I happened to be at a conference that was being sponsored over in Grand Rapids, and I met the man who was putting together that series, and he just asked me. He knew I was Roman Catholic, and he came up and he said, "Brad, I know you like the founding, and I know you like Roman Catholicism. Would you be interested in doing the Carol?" And I just immediately said yes. That was really a dream come true to be able to do that, and I had a great time writing that book. And
I have to read that now. I didn't know that anyone had ever done that. Did ISI do a good job of telling people that there was a biography of Charles Carroll available?
Yeah, they did, and they've still promoted it. In fact, I'm still getting checks for that one. That was that's done well. And they did a very nice job of promoting that. They ended up only publishing, I think, 4 maybe out of the series that I thought was going to be much bigger of the Forgotten Founders. But yeah, that was one of them, and they've treated that book very well. Thanks for having me.
Archbishop Chaput listens to every show every morning in Philadelphia. I'm sure he and I are going to talk about Charles Carroll, America's first Catholic. That's what I call him. And my friends at John Carroll get mad at me. That's a fine little school in Cleveland. Larry Arnn, I don't know. Do you ever play John Carroll in sports?
No.
Jesuits would beat you. You got to be careful. The Jesuits would beat you. You just got to be careful. They'll beat you.
No Jesuits would ever take Larry. No way.
I am very fond of you Catholics, you and Brad. You guys are having a love fest right now. But I will tell you that I would be mortally ashamed if we got beat by John Carroll.
They're very good. Hey, this is off subject. Now Hillsdale is home to one of the two finest churches on a campus in America. I think Thomas Aquinas College has a beautiful chapel. Not surprisingly, it's designed by the same person who designed yours. But Brad, can you go to Mass in there? I don't think it's been consecrated to allow Mass to be performed there, has it?
No, it has. There's a side chapel that every Thursday there's Mass. Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, that chapel is just stunning, and I think it's one of Larry's many great accomplishments.
Only every Thursday? You don't have a priest who'll show up every day to do Mass at Hillsdale?
We have daily Mass at our parish. Yes, we do.
Well, I've worshipped at your parish. It's full of Hillsdale kids. I just think you ought to seize control of the president's office and turn it into a Catholic college.
You know, let me just issue a papal bull. Brad can go to Catholic Mass there, but you cannot, Hugh.
You know, it's sort of like Elizabethan England. All the Catholics could meet in a certain room and run over and seize control of the. And unfortunately, if it doesn't work, you'll all be hung. But that's okay. You can still make a push going. Let's talk about John Winthrop. First of all, Dr. Arnn, I've got the American Heritage Reader in front of me, which is the Hillsdale College Bible. And when did this start, and why does it keep getting bigger?
The reader. Gosh, Brad, that's got to be 25 years old now, I think, something like that.
It's older. I've been here 22, and it's older than I am.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's only been redone once, and that was not long after I came here, and I had some input into it, and Brad did. Brad's a show pony, by the way. He's one of our most popular teachers.
Well, let me ask the show pony then. Yeah. I don't know anything about John Winthrop until after I read the introduction in this. Why is he so little known?
Oh, that's a great question, Hugh, and really he shouldn't have been. I'm certainly, when I took colonial history in college, the first thing we read was Edmund Morgan's The Puritan Dilemma, which is that little, they used to have that whole series of little brown biographies that were just fantastic. Everything from Sitting Bull to Elizabeth Cady Stanton to Harry Truman, they were all in this series. And John Winthrop was in that series. So I got exposed to him pretty early. I mean, I was probably a junior in college when I first read that. So I think probably a bit of it is just luck of the draw, who you had as a professor and what courses you took. But
I had Judith Sklar. And I did early American political writings from Judith Sklar. He was not in that curriculum, and she was a fine professor. I think there's an ideological reason. Do you agree with me? Do you sense what it might be?
Well, I mean, it certainly could be. I wouldn't fight that by any means. He's an interesting figure, and the fact that people like Ronald Reagan gravitated so much towards him, and of course, not just Ronald Reagan, but people going all the way back to the 20s, politicians especially, have been citing John Winthrop. So I think there maybe was a bit of a revival of him in the 20th century. But yeah, I could see that you would have a professor that might eschew that.
When we come back from break, I'm going to ask Dr. Arnn why he thinks Judith Sklar didn't teach Winthrop, even though there's a house named for him on the grounds of Harvard. And we'll find out what it is that Winthrop wrote that affects us to this very day and ought to actually impact us more when we come back. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Show ponies and presidents. That's what we're doing this week. Stay tuned, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Food for the Poor.
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another $1 trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, and the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Well, my question is, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about systemic racism, and I mentioned one of your nuggets that actually more white people, unarmed white people, are killed than black people. And you say, of course they are, because there's more white people in this country than black people. So what's the answer to that? I didn't know how to come back on that.
Real simple. White people are what percentage of the population? Around 61%. What percentage of the homicides are committed by white people? 50%, meaning they commit, as a percentage of their population, less murders than blacks do at 13%. We commit almost half of the homicides at 13%. So at 13%, we're far, far more likely to be an offender and a victim of a homicide. A young black man is anywhere from 7 to 10 times more likely, Larry, to be the victim of a homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black man. The leading cause of death for young white men, Larry, is accidents, like car accidents or pool drownings. The leading cause of death, preventable or non-preventable for young black men, homicide, almost always at the hands of another black man. That is why the police are there. It is true that the police are 2.5 times more likely to kill a black suspect. It's also true, as I said, that a young black suspect is 7 or 8 times more likely to be a victim of a homicide. That's why the cops are there. You look at a city, Larry, like St. Louis. St. Louis is about 45% black. About 300 homicides last year, 90% of them black on black. Baltimore, 65% black. About 400 homicides last year, 90% of them black on black. Chicago, a third black, a third white, a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides black on black. Tell your friend that.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
Welcome back, America. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway on the Hugh Hewitt Show with Dr. Larry Arnn, Dr. Brad Berzer of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu. All of our previous conversations, all 300 plus of them in the Hillsdale Dialogue, are collected at hugh4hillsdale.com, and the podcasts of them are available as well at a Hillsdale website. Find that. Dr. Berzer, first a little background on John Winthrop before we go to the writings that are included in the American Heritage Reader at Hillsdale. Who is he? Why do we care?
Yeah, thanks, Hugh, and thanks for everything you've done for Hillsdale, too. It's just fantastic. So John Winthrop, I mean, you look at his years. He was born in 1588 and he died in 1649, which means that he was living in one of the most interesting and tumultuous times in English history. You've got Queen Elizabeth, King James, King Charles, of course, the Puritan Civil War that happens towards the end of his life. Winthrop himself grew up in a very kind of upper middle class family with a home that was very welcoming, even to Catholics, despite the fact that he was a very devout Puritan, a very devout Congregationalist. But he grew up in a very tolerant house, ended up going to Cambridge for a couple of years, didn't graduate there, but did go for a couple of years, and became one of these figures who, once there was a movement to come to America and to start colonizing America, he wasn't the very first person to recommend that, but once it was recommended to him, he became kind of the first great organizer that we can think of the people who come over and settle here. So we have four major groups that settle in America. We have the Quakers who come to Pennsylvania. We have the Anglicans who go to Virginia, the Scotch-Irish who settle all over the place. But, of course, for us, and this discussion this morning, it's really the Puritans of New England that matter so much. And Winthrop was really at the center of that. And it's fascinating to read not only how he organized the journey coming over to America, but just the frontier conditions, which were horrible for several years, and the way that they had to survive in the wilderness and try and make things work with only very limited supplies and often very low morale. It was Winthrop who really pulled through that experiment, ultimately resulting in about 21,000 people migrating to live under John Winthrop's rule, that is, to live in colonial New England. And that's, when you think about those years, just 1629 to 1641, where you've got 21,000 people coming there, and that doesn't count the people who are going to the other colonies. That's just to New England. That's pretty stunning. And Winthrop really spent most of his career as governor. There were times, as we saw in the second document, where he's no longer governor, but a magistrate. But he was governor more often than not of the whole Massachusetts Bay Colony. And I think, by almost any standard, did an astounding job. I think, as Reagan said, he was a great freedom man. And I think there was truly something about that in the way that we look at Winthrop's rule. He had to balance a lot of things, but I think overall he was an extremely effective statesman.
When you sent Larry and I the memo to help us get ready for this, I read a line, gave me a little chill. I want people to read it because I've never heard it described this way. The Puritans were one of the four great free folk migrations of the colonial period, along with the Anglicans to Virginia and the Chesapeake, the Quakers to Pennsylvania and Delaware, and the Scots-Irish to various parts of the English colonies. The four great free folk. I've never heard it put that way, Dr. Berzer, before. Is that a common technical term?
I take that. That's from a book that I really like, and I cited that in that memo that I sent to you and Larry. It's a book called Albion Seed by David Hackett Fisher, and it's the subtitle is The Four British Folkways in America, and he describes them as these kind of cultural ways of understanding. And the reason it's the four free is because obviously it doesn't include those who are being brought from Africa. So the Africans would be the fifth migration, but of course they're coming against their own will.
They are enslaved. But Dr. Arnn, do you use that team, the four great free folk?
Well, I know Brad for a long time, so of course.
So he's an evangelist. Yeah. Well, I have not read Albion Seed, so now I have to read Charles Carroll and Albion Seed. And when we come back, we'll talk about the two readings. They're in the American Heritage Reader. By the way, it's available at hillsdale.edu. You have to pay for it, but there's a lot that's free at hillsdale.edu, including courses on the American founding, which you ought to read. I don't know if Dr. Berzer's course is up there, but maybe Larry Arnn will figure it out that he ought to, before the coup happens and he's out back in the little hut that we're going to put him in, he ought to get Dr. Berzer up at hillsdale.edu. Stay tuned, America.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Biden announcing yesterday, here's what he said about enough vaccines for every adult in America in a matter of weeks.
We're now on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult in America by the end of May. Let me say that again. When we came into office, the prior administration had contracted for not nearly enough vaccine to cover adults in America. We rectified that. About 3 weeks ago, we were able to say that we'll have enough vaccine supply for adults by the end of July. And I'm pleased to announce today, as a consequence of the stepped-up process that I've ordered and just outlined, this country will have enough vaccine supply, I'll say it again, for every adult in America by the end of May.
Now, while that's good news, he can't help himself in taking pot shots at the previous administration that has delivered the vaccines to the world. They laughed. They mocked Trump when he set a target date of having a vaccine at the end of 2020. Well, guess what? We got the vaccine by the end of 2020. You know why? Because of President Trump's Operation Warp Speed. Remember Kamala Harris, who said she might not even take the vaccine that was recommended by the Trump administration? Well, now they've done a 180-degree pivot. Now, as the Wall Street Journal editorial board points out, the Biden-Harris administration has changed to full-throated encouragement.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Jerry Bowyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. Investors, the business press, and just ordinary citizens concerned about their 401k accounts are beginning to get worried about inflation. For most of my career, I've been talking conservative leaders down from dire predictions of imminent inflation. Now I think that inflation is a very real short and midterm risk. Last year, the Trump administration borrowed $3.3 trillion, yes, with a T, to fund COVID relief and various stimuli. At the end of the year, almost another trillion was agreed to, and now the new president is proposing an additional almost $2 trillion. So far, almost all of this new spending has been financed out of the central bank's creation of new monetary base. In other words, we printed the money we spent. Inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The Fed is giving us too much money, and the low-growth Biden economy will provide too few goods. And Americans are right to be concerned. I'm Jerry Bowyer.
The Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, impacting policy decisions today, preparing public leaders for tomorrow. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
You see, the story of the nursing homes is actually a very complicated story. The nursing home story is one that we warned about on this program, and the great one Mark Levin warned about back in March. I remember listening to the Mark Levin radio program, and a woman called into the Great One's radio show and said, "Mark, I work for a nursing home association, and Andrew Cuomo is now ordering Chinese coronavirus infected patients to be put into nursing homes." And at the time, Andrew Cuomo was doing his multi-hour, slow, daily briefings. Mark Levin asked the caller, "This can't possibly be true." And Janice Dean, who works for Fox News, claims that both of her parents were killed as a result of this policy. Let's also get the tape of Janice Dean. So this was a scandal that we knew was occurring. Now, putting Chinese coronavirus infected patients into nursing homes is bad enough. But Andrew Cuomo decided to do something worse than that. He doubled down on the policy, lied about it ever happening, and then covered it up. You see, early on in the virus, it's understandable that mistakes are going to be made. Some Republican governors made some mistakes. And you course correct. You say, we shouldn't have done that. and you adjust. That's what being a leader is all about. So do I think that Andrew Cuomo was a fool to sign off on this policy? Absolutely.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. We're talking about John Winthrop, one of the great early figures of American history, and he arrived in this country in the spring of 1630. I believe that's correct. And one of his legacies is a tract called A Model of Christian Charity, which is in the Hillsdale American Heritage Reader. And I'm joined by Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, and Brad Birzer, who is a doctor of, Professor Birzer teaches early American founding and philosophy, but he's agreed to take this on. I read A Model of Christian Charity for the first time this week, Dr. Birzer, and I'm kind of astonished. I've never seen it before, and it comes in two parts. It's not unlike a legal brief, a statement of facts and then an argument from facts. Would you describe A Model of Christian Charity for us?
Yeah, well, I think you just did perfectly. It is this fascinating sermon that begins with a couple of definitions, a couple of arguments. Then we have this catechesis right in the middle of it, question and answer. What's the question? What's the answer? And then after that, we get the culmination of all of it, the legal definitions along with the catechesis. And we have this really dramatic moment at the end where Winthrop is citing Jesus' Sermon on the Mount from Matthew and begins to talk about how their community has to be a community that will be, as Reagan said at the beginning of our session, will be a city upon a hill upon which all eyes of the world will be upon. And, talk about a burden. I think sometimes, and I know sometimes in American textbooks, this is seen as kind of arrogant, as if, well, look at this city upon a hill, America thinks it's so great. In another way, it can be seen as something that's unbelievably humbling. Right? This is, my gosh, we're the city on a hill. If we mess this up, we mess it up for everybody. If we get this wrong, we get it wrong for everybody. So in a sense, it's not arrogant in the least. It's actually quite the opposite. And I think it fits with Winthrop, who in this kind of public sermon is really talking about the nature of Christ and the nature of humility and what sacrifice means. So there's a lot to it. There's a lot of depth, especially as we're thinking about how the Christian faith might inform our politics. There's a lot of depth there.
So, Dr. Arnn, if we were to think about someone of parallel stature in the United States today, Winthrop is a significant man in England. I mean, he's a big guy, and he's getting on a boat, and he's not coming back, and he's going to what is at that point a primitive existence. I actually don't know that we could, and he's not a young man when he does this, right? He's, 48 years old when he gets on a boat and he's going to the frontier. It's actually extraordinary.
Yeah. It also shows, to see the New England colonies are 20 years old when he does this. And that means, by the way, there was a magic about them. What a thing, right? What a vast land. It would be, after Winthrop, it would be until Lewis and Clark, 1807, I think, that they knew how big the continent was, right? But they knew it was big, and it was open, and we're building a whole new world there. And then Winthrop is a very well-born man. He's had every advantage all his life. He's smart as a whip. He's got, all the education that was available. And then he picks up and goes in middle age, and that's because isn't this important? And of course, that statement that we're reading from, that he made on the ship, Arabella, was it? That's a personal statement too. That's why I'm going. Look at this, and it's a wonderful thing. And
I want to read. You have to understand who you are before you know what you're doing, and he knows who we are, and he addresses these Puritans on this boat, and it's fairly late in the immigration of the 21,000 Puritans. We are a company professing ourselves fellow members of Christ, in which respect only, though we are absent from each other many miles, and had our employments as far distant, yet we ought to account ourselves, and knit together by this bond of love, and live in this exercise of it, if we are to take comfort in our being in Christ. We are a company professing ourselves fellow members of Christ. So he's actually talking to all these people on the boat, and he's saying, we're in this together. We're stuck with each other. I'm struck by how personal this is, Brad.
Yeah, and I think that's a part of New England congregationalism. Right? The congregation is everything. In every way, it's everything. It is the center of their world. A family becomes the kind of key social unit, but beyond the family, which was a way to get people into the church, basically, beyond that, you have the congregation, which is the church. And every community is essentially equal to every congregation. Every congregation is equal to every community. So once you had a congregation that became too big, you had to start a new one, and they were always of a certain size. And these people knew each other, and they were, as John Winthrop says, taking again from Scripture, we are one body. We are many men who become one body. And that, I think, is one of the most interesting things about the New England experiment. You don't have that in any other settlement in America. Even the Quakers, who meet as friends, do so really as a combination of individuals. But in New England, that individuality becomes so much an essential part of the whole body that they really are as if parts of the body to the body as a whole.
Winthrop writes, or speaks on the ship, we must not content ourselves with usual ordinary means. Whatsoever we did or ought to have done when we lived in England, the same we must do, and more also where we go. We must bear one another's burdens. We must not look only on our own things, but also on the things of our brethren. Neither must we think that the Lord will bear with such failings at our hands as he does from those among whom we have lived. We had a much higher standard. Larry, it sounds like you're talking to the freshmen who are showing up at Hillsdale.
That's right. And it's the same kind of thing. If you just think, to go back to this idea of compact, it's very powerful because on the one hand, it subordinates the individual to the community, and yet on the other, the community is made up of the willing individuals. And there's a kind of a constitutional protection in that to keep it from becoming a police state. And these doctrines are very strong, and they were deeply held, and they called forth from the people who held them just prodigies of achievement.
Prodigies of achievement and great exemplars of learning. I also noted in this, Professor Berzer, that he is so schooled in Scripture. He just tosses this off, right? I'm sure he's done his homework, but it is heavily annotated, and it all depends on Micah chapter 6. I mean, it all comes back to the only way to avoid shipwreck and to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. We must delight in each other's company, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work. I am actually astonished that this is not more widely known, because it's a communitarianism which has sort of vanished from America.
Yeah, it is beautiful, and that text from Micah is all over the colonial period. By the time we get to the American Revolution, the favorite passage of Americans, in which they don't even explain the passage, sometimes they'll just say Micah 4:4, which everybody knows, is that every man shall sit under his own vine and fig tree unafraid. It's one of the most important definitions of liberty in the colonial and then especially in the American Revolutionary period. So, pretty amazing prophet, of course, from a Christian standpoint, from a Jewish standpoint, but from a historical standpoint, what a figure. Just amazing.
So what kind of government do they establish, Dr. Arnn? I mean, what is the Puritan a means of governing themselves?
Well, that in the beginning, it changed quite a lot over time because the original thing they discovered didn't really work. They established a community of religious conformity. That means you're a member of the church, you go. If you don't, somebody will come talk to you, and your manners are observed from your neighbors. And that might sound despotic to us today, but remember, you said this kind of community we don't have. Well, we're busy building it right now, right? Just look at the doctrines, at the struggle sessions that universities and the Fortune 500 and all the media and tech companies put their employees through, right? It's much more intrusive than anything going on in New England, but it's not like what went on in New England in its basis. In New England, nobody was confused that you could go to heaven because somebody else told you to or made you do right. In other words, it was to elicit and sustain consent in all its steps. And, if you just look at what happened through the 150 years before the American Revolution, it loosened significantly. But those points didn't disappear at all.
But this is the starting point for the 150-year evolution. I know some people look at the Mayflower Compact, but I actually think if you want to understand the American founding, you have to go through those 150 years with an eye on the Old and New Testaments. And this is so explicitly biblical and a higher standard calling that it's quite bracing. Dr. Berzer, can you get to the founding without Winthrop?
Oh, I think it'd be very difficult. I mean, this really is the beginning of the New England way and an understanding, which we're going to see. I mean, I think, Dr. Arnn's absolutely right about looking at the way that the government works, moving from this deeply, almost oppressive at times, religious organization to becoming something much more tolerant. And that's both, I think both good and bad in the way that toleration plays out, because there's also within that New England way, then, as Dr. Arnn said, this kind of oppressiveness in terms of trying to understand what an ideology is. But no, I mean, I think in the best sense, John Winthrop is certainly one of the American founders in the way that he is laying this out, breaking the wilderness, giving an understanding of community. But also, I think that he personally, as a statesman, does a really good job of trying to balance what could be a more oppressive kind of conformist society with a much more individual society that's based on conscience.
When we come back, the last segment of this week's Hillsdale Dialogue, we're going to talk about John Winthrop in the dock, because though he was a great figure in the first governor and governor, he ends up in the dock, and we'll talk about why in the next segment. Let me remind everyone as well, speaking of community, Christians believe they have a community all over the world, and as a result, they have to help those in need all over the world. Food for the Poor does that. It's a Christian organization, originally Catholic, now non-denominational. They serve everyone. They don't care whether or not people believe, and mostly they serve the starving in places where society is broken down to the basic level where thousands are starving. That's Honduras this year. COVID has shattered that country with a particular vengeance, and many are fleeing and leaving for El Norte and going north, and that's no picnic. And in the meantime, those who are left behind are starving. Food for the Poor has a banner at hughhewitt.com. You'll see click to donate at Food for the Poor. Please join our campaign. The Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I have been generous this year as best we can, and we would encourage everyone to dig as deep as possible because the crisis is so significant. 855-359-4673 or go to hughhewitt.com. And don't forget, I'm sure Dr. Arnn's going to do a marathon of walking this weekend. I am too. ReliefFactor.com, $19.95. is the 3-week starter pack. Great sponsors of this show, and 3 times a day, I remind you, 15 times a week. Go get it. If you haven't got it, $19.95 is the starter pack. Get going. Try it for 3 weeks. See if it helps you stay out there and active and moving. And if you have packs at home, put one in your car so that when you commute, you don't commute and say, oh, my gosh, and hit yourself in the forehead and say, I forgot my ReliefFactor.com. Take it every day. Feel better every day and tomorrow. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn, Dr. Berzer, as we conclude this week's Hillsdale Dialogue. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Food for the Poor.